मेरो नाम हो राई बाद्री गुरुङ.
My name is Grant Birmingham.
My name is Mark Anders.
My name is Kylie.
Angela Linford.
I'm Carol Frisbee.
मेरो दिल गुरुङ हो.
My name is Heather.
त्यहाँदेखि अमेरिकाको आज 3 वर्ष टक्कै भयो.
Medicaid is a tough thing for me because I have an extremely complicated medical issue.
I've been a IBS patient since it was about 17.
त्यो रेटहरुमा त कति खेप गयो 4-5 खेप लगेको त्यतिखेर मेटिएर थिए हैन.
I fall into the Medicaid gap.
I have no insurance and I cannot get insurance.
And I'm in the gap.
I am in the coverage gap.
I never thought I'd be in it.
I've heard the term used out there, donut hole. I think that's a loosely used term. There are circumstances that people will often find themselves in where, for various reasons, they might have coverage around them or just partial coverage, which means there's a hole in some of the coverage or some of the assistance or benefits or help that this person might realistically need to solve their issues.
I don't like the term donut hole because donut hole implies that there's a bottom that gets coverage and then there's somebody in the middle and then there's a top that gets coverage. And right now there's a top that gets coverage and the people who don't get coverage are just the bottom all the way down to zero. If you make even $1 more than the poverty level, you have a pretty good option available to you right now. You can go on the exchange. They pay 90% of your premium cost and a fair amount of your co-pays. If you make $1 less than the poverty level, you get nothing.
खेती गरेर बस्थेँ. मैले आर्मीमा 19 वर्ष गरेँ. त्यहाँदेखि त्यस्तै आन्दोलन उठ्यो, केही थाहा भएन. अनि 93 मा भुटान छोडेर म नेपाल आएर बसेँ. अमेरिका अब हामीले के सुन्यौँ भनेदेखिको अब सबैजना आउन थाल्यो. त्यही नभन्छ न कहाँ जानु, अब जग्गा जमिन छैन. साथी गएको ठाउँमा जाउँला भनेर चाहिँ आयौँ.
You know about the refugee that come from either in the camp many years or from the war when they are lost either part of their body or lack of nutrition, whatever it is.
They're in a war-torn country and they didn't choose to come to the US. They were sent here. Obviously they were probably happy to be out of a refugee camp, but it's not. I sometimes hear, like, oh, go back to your own country. Why are you trying to take our, assistance or what, and it's like they don't choose to come here. They didn't immigrate here. Not say that immigrants shouldn't have healthcare either, but there is a difference.
नेपालमा चाहिँ अब अलिक छाडा देश हो, अलिक म्युन्टोलाई आएर कुटेर मारिहाल्छ. मलाई यहाँ डर लाग्दैन. आफ्नो न्याममा हिँड्यो भने डर छैन.
यहाँ सबसे भन्दा हामीले भाषा भएपछि बुझ्न सक्दैन हैन. बिमारी भयो भने पनि साह्रो पर्ने रहेछ. तर नेपालको भन्दा चाहिँ यहाँ धेरै सुरक्षा राम्रो छ.
तँखेरि जस्तो काम गर्न सक्दिन. अनि अब अलिअलि पैसा सखाएर मागौँ भन्दा उमेरले पुगेको छैन. आधा बिचमा भएको छु हामी चाहिँ. र अहिले अलिअलि म स्कुल पढ्दैछु, अलिअलि दिनुहुन्छ. भाषा अब आइज भनेको बुझ्छु, जा भनेको बुझ्छु, त्यति नै हो. अब म चाहिँ अहिले बिहानै स्कुल जान्छु. 5 घन्टा स्कुल पढ्छु, 2 बजी आउँछु. ढुक्कै म त्यसै त्यहाँ पढ्न पाइन्छ. त्यस्तो हो नि त. पढ्न पाइन्छ.
Here we are. We bring the refugee from a different country, and we want them to be empowered, and we make them to be stand up on their feet and to help us to grow our economy in here. How you be healthy? I mean, to be empowered or to be self-reliant if you are sick, you don't have a doctor to see.
If you're self-reliant, if you're good and healthy and able to work, you're contributing to the economy and you're not having to rely on government assistance. So it just makes sense. Everyone's going to benefit if everyone's healthy.
lot of it was poor choices he'd made when he was younger. I think he was really fragile emotionally. He had been through a lot.
When I first met him, he was so quiet, and I would call him Mouse because he would mumble everything he said.
In the last instance, he had a girlfriend that in 2007 passed away, and he was doing really well until then. And that's, how he dealt with it was to start drinking. And it was just devastating for him. He just always tended to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. So when something like that happened to somebody that was close to him, he nearly fell apart. But he tried so hard, and when he met Jamie, he really did rally. And
at the convenience store, that's where we met. And it took a long time to get him to talk to me.
He's shy.
Yeah, he eventually did.
And that changed his life, but I think the damage was done. Would have been some difficult times coming, but we were all ready to face that and help him through it. Just didn't have an opportunity. I've looked into the donut hole, the gap in Medicaid, and there are people who move into it as a temporary safety net and then they move on. This isn't like you're going to start with so many thousands of people and then the rolls are just going to grow.
Some fact that most people aren't aware of, the average adult is on Medicaid for 17 months. It's not a lifelong thing, it's a bridge.
It's temporary. It's just so important for me to be the one writing the checks and taking care of those expenses.
I get weary of people demonizing Medicaid patients as though they're somehow irresponsible. They don't show up for appointments. They go to the ER at the drop of a hat.
3 stockbroker's license, a real estate license, an associate's degree, sergeant in the Army, returned missionary, elders quorum president, and they want to tell me I'm a bum?
One of the phrases I hate most is that we should only treat the worthy poor. And I wonder, which ones are those?
You will find that most people in the coverage gap, or most people that are struggling with a medical problem and then having income problems, are people who want to work.
Most of the people are people like me who are in a hard time for a while, but we really want to take care of ourselves. We want to be self-reliant, and that's why I'm going to school.
You're talking to a person that worked his whole life. I know I got taxed about $250 a week. Add that up over 35 years, that's a lot of money.
I would be making $250,000 a year.
I would much rather be able to support myself and to contribute than to not. It feels much worse.
I imagine myself working to 65 in retirement.
I work like 35 to 40 hours a week.
म यस्तो बिमार थिएन भने म कति काम गर्ने थिएँ म अरूको छेउमा त्यो सानो भएर हिँड्ने थिएन म कति मिलेर म काम गर्न जाने थिएँ.
For people will say to me, gosh, I wish I could stay home from work, and my response, is often, fine, I will trade you in a second.
You could interview 50 people and you would find that 48 of them are trying to work. You might find 2 going, hey, wow, look, I can milk this system. But that's not the majority. That's not what most people do. And you don't make public policy based on the abuse of a very, very minor few.
I work graveyards, so I usually wake up at like 9 p.m. and have breakfast. But I go to work and then just come home and do homework, and until I'm so tired that I can't actually do homework anymore because my answers are all wrong, and then I just go back to sleep.
Got into a situation where I was considered, quote, working poor, where I was still working, I was still getting some income, and then I fell into this perverse created term called the Medicaid coverage gap.
The Affordable Care Act was an attempt to extend health insurance to the tens of millions of Americans that don't have access to it. And it does this through a number of different ways. One is through healthcare.gov, the marketplace where people buy insurance. And that's for those people that are actually not poor, people that are above the poverty line. The ACA, the Obamacare, was designed to help poor people by expanding Medicaid. But then the Supreme Court ruled that the federal government cannot require states to do this. And so then many states like Utah decided that they weren't going to do this. what people don't understand is that there's this economic question of, is the Obamacare program good for the country overall? That's a very big, complicated question. Whether we should take back our portion of the money is not a very complicated question.
The underlying fact is, if you have already paid for 90% of something and you're getting nothing back for that, if you cannot figure out a way to pay the last 10%, you're not really trying very hard.
If you were doing your taxes in April and you think, well, federal government's taking a lot of my taxes, I think I'm going to protest the fact that they're taxing me so heavily by not taking any of my refund back. I'm just going to let it go. I say, oh, this federal government wants to give me this refund, I'm not going to take it. That's essentially what the economics of this is about, is that our taxes go to Washington and now our legislature is saying, no, we don't want them back. We're tossing away about $50 million a month as a state by inaction. We've lost, in the neighborhood of $800 or $900 million.
Oh, we've got it's over $700,000.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Like I think it's reaching $700,000 in medical bills.
And it's just like, well, sorry, we're not paying.
And this is for less than 24 hours in the hospital.
Hours in the ER and the ICU.
Cost
grab dash effort to keep her alive. We just stop counting. We just get the bills and throw them in a box because it's ridiculous. Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
She was a stay-at-home mom also until we were like 14 years old, and she was the mom who was always in the classroom. Like she was always volunteering. She was always she was also the kind of the cool hippie mom who would like bring in another alternative viewpoint to the class. So she would bring I remember one time she brought our entire class up to our yard to show people our garden and teach everyone about flowers, and just a super interesting lesson about what's a daisy, very simple, but for the kids, I remember students years later saying, I remember that field trip to your garden.
She dedicated 16 years of her life to the Salt Lake City School District and to the hardest students, and it was just all she did.
And she talked about it with such passion. They don't give insurance coverage to anybody who's a part-time employee. So most of the only people who get health coverage through the district are the teachers and administrators. So para-educators, lunch ladies, any support staff through the district are not covered under the district's health insurance policy. She applied for disability when she first got sick, and she was denied it because she kept working, because she couldn't not work. She didn't share a lot of the details about what exactly was going on with her body.
We do know it had something to do with her thyroid.
There was a thyroid thing, and there was a heart valve problem.
Because she didn't have healthcare coverage, she let things go until it was critical. She had to be like, okay, well, am I sick enough to go to the doctor now, and possibly bankrupt myself, or can I fight through it and heal myself and become better? She became so sick that there was no other option than to go to the emergency room, and then it just blew up into complete and utter critical travesty at that moment.
She was living with us at the time of her death because we needed to help support her, and we sold the house she was living in so that we'd have a chunk of money as a nest egg to help if something really bad happened.
As her family, she didn't want to become bankrupt. I mean, she was 62 years old when she died, and she should have been able to think about retiring, but instead she's like, well, I just need to work forever.
Yeah.
Because she didn't have a retirement, and it was always the money thing that kept her from going into and getting treatment that she needed. She walked to work the week before she died.
It was just such she was a mom to the very end. She was just like a good mom to the bitter end. It was amazing. Such an amazing woman. Gone way too soon.
Like many others, I'm perplexed that we live in the greatest nation on earth, the wealthiest nation on earth, and yet still have between 40 and 50 million with no health insurance. No other developed country in the world is in our situation, and it doesn't make sense.
We got a lot in the United States. Utah's got a strong economy. Utah is growing. There is enough money for Medicaid expansion. It's there.
I used to be winded going out to the porch. Not anymore.
She's basically pretty much just bedridden, take a shower, get up, do a few things, and just,
I was really homebound, I guess.
Really homebound with oxygen. And
I knew that in my family history, there were other types of cancer. But I know of nobody that had the colon like I do.
The truth is, if you have primary care, meaning if you get early medical care in an appropriate setting, not an emergency room, you're likely to get a much more effective treatment, prevent illness from becoming chronic or serious, and sometimes you can get preventive services that prevent illness in the first place.
You know, I'm getting a little older, and these things start showing up, you know, in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and staying on top of that and at the beginning of a disease can mean the difference between life and death.
Kidney disease or eye disease or peripheral vascular disease, stroke, those are the costly things to treat. And if you treat them or prevent them from developing, and which you can do over time for years, it saves a lot of money, but it's also the humane thing to do.
Just felt like that I kind of got by until finally had blockage.
I had a patient, this is now 4 years ago, who got breast cancer. This is one of the more horrible stories. Most of them don't end up this bad, but she got a breast cancer, and it got diagnosed right when the economy crashed back in 2009. The insurance covered taking the tumor out, but then they came back and said, well, we think we got it all, but we don't really know that. You can't know that right now. We really recommend that you get chemotherapy and radiation. By then she was saying, okay, I can no longer afford $900 a month for the Cobra. I am out of cash to pay for that. I certainly can't afford the $250 visit just to walk into the oncology office. So I hope you were right that you got it all and did not get those treatments. And she was not right. And so it was 3 or 4 years later. She did fine for a while, but the cancer was still there, and the cancer came back, and it killed her a year and a half ago. She died, I think she was 47 years old. Otherwise would have been completely healthy. She'd started a couple of businesses. She had skills at accounting, a beautiful person with what should have been 30 or 40 years of life still to go, which, I mean, only God knows what would have happened if she would have got the treatment that she should have gotten. But we do have reasonable success in treating those things when people get all the treatments that they should get, and she did not until it was too late.
I'm supposed to get labs every month, which is a urine and a blood sample every month. Since I've been here in Utah without insurance, and I've been here almost 7 months, I've done 3 of them. That is not good. I am pushing the envelope, but I should not be skipping labs for any reason at all. What if I'm doing that right now and it's going to cost me in the long run later on, and it might cost me a year or 2 of my life?
I've been having some abnormal blood tests, but I can't afford to do any testing beyond just the initial, level of them.
Boy, he was right on board. We kept graphs of his levels of all of his different enzymes and proteins and bilirubin and all these things that showed the function of his organs, and it was really neat to see how involved he was and how much he wanted to get better, more so than he ever dreamed he would in the past. And then to have him not have those medications, I think just the emotional trauma of just making progress and then just have the door slammed in his face, I think that was as devastating as anything.
his liver was so bad off that he couldn't think clearly. He wasn't able to clear out the toxins that your liver normally clears out. So he was declared disabled and was put on Medicaid. And so that paid for those hospital bills and the expensive medicines he needed. And months went by and he was doing a little better, but he said to himself, I think I'm doing well enough that I could work 10 hours a week. Bam! The computer kicks that out and you get cut off your Medicaid.
I don't think he knew the ramifications then of finding a part-time job. He wanted nothing more than to get back up on his feet and provide a good life for Jamie. And at the critical time, it was pulled away from him. When the Medicaid ended, and he kind of withdrew into a shell again. And what really hurt me at that time was him saying I should have never gone back to work. Here he was trying to do what he was supposed to do and to be responsible. And he was probably right that he should have never gone back to work. But that's where he met Jamie. So we have that.
When I was in Ely, they noticed that I had reduced kidney function. It hurt my lungs, COPD, and I was literally coughing up blood. Well, the ultimate diagnosis was Wagner's. Wagner's 20 years ago was 2025 was a fatal disease. It's basically when it attacked my kidneys, it shut them down. So a lot of people said you should file your disability claim right away. And I waited because I wanted to get better, and I hoped that I would get better. I wanted to go back to my job.
As you can imagine, since you have to be 100% disabled to get coverage, that leaves a large gray area of people who are partially disabled, which any number of medical conditions can cause you to be that. You could still work a little bit, you could still work some, but you're not going to be able to work an 8-hour shift because of your emphysema or your coronary disease or your Crohn's disease or whatever it may be. You're not covered until you become 100% disabled and permanently disabled.
My immune system malfunctions. It kind of under-responds and over-responds. It's almost as if my white cells or my T cells are blind. It's not a problem, however, that's technically described and in a Medicaid manual. And so even though I've officially applied for Medicaid, I have not qualified for that. It takes medical care to get medical care. It's a catch-22. It's kind of an irony. You can't document a medical problem because you can't afford to go get the tests and go to the doctors to get a particular problem documented to the point where it then can be evaluated properly.
Applying for disability is one of the most difficult things that I've had to deal with my illness, and because it's very difficult to provide the court what the evidence that they need to definitively give a disability ruling. I have myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is a more medically correct term for the lay term chronic fatigue syndrome. I was training for a half marathon at the time that I became ill. And I just woke up one day with a really bad case of what I thought was the flu. I just was dizzy. I was in and out of consciousness. I just couldn't function. I stayed home from work for, I think it was about 2 weeks. Turns out that I never got better. It's been 11 and a half years now.
I think my gallbladder being removed was probably the biggest one. I just remember I threw up like 1.5 cups of blood, and so my roommate ran me to the hospital, and I got there and they told me I had to get my gallbladder removed because I had gallstones, and I told them I didn't want to because I didn't have any insurance or anything, and they told me it needed to be done. It was an emergency, and I did it, and then the problem still persists. I still throw up blood all the time.
It was the emergency room visits, and he didn't like that either because he had no way to pay for those. But we all know in the healthcare system, they can't turn you away from emergency rooms.
I had $36,000 in medical debt, 36 some change, I don't know, a lot of medical debt.
I don't like to beg from these doctors. They've been good, they've treated me, but I have a stack of bills over there, about $4,500 that I'm going to be liable for.
It would have been at least $2,000.
$2,000. $8.90 an hour, come up with $2,000 very fast.
Like collection agencies just kept calling me like every day, and I asked my friend's dad what I should do, and he was like maybe you should just file for bankruptcy. Like if you tell them you're doing bankruptcy, then they'll start leaving you alone, and you can figure out a way to get the debt going and just start building credit instead of having it go down.
It can devastate a family or financially for years.
This first 3 years from 2014 through 2016, the federal government pays 100% of all costs associated with expanding Medicaid. And states have been expanding Medicaid, and they've been designing different kind of alternative things to do with those funds, which Governor Herbert has come up with his Healthy Utah
This
plan.
is something that it's a political compromise. It's been worked out between right and left, and it works in a practical way for most of Utah. It does. And I think it's even maybe a little bit of an example for some of the other states.
It was very interesting to me over the last year or so to see the participants in the discussion over the expansion gap, the coverage gap in healthcare in Utah. We saw really what I think was a pretty unlikely alliance of stakeholders in the community. We saw churches coming forward, no great surprise there, but many of our business leaders speaking out and saying, look, this is a state we want to attract new businesses to, we want to attract new investment. Having a robust healthcare system is vital to that, and making sure that those wage earners that are in that gap area are covered is very important to our business community interests. I think some people just start from a philosophical position that it's morally wrong for the government to provide health care in general. And so then anything you propose to them that involves the government putting together a plan that is going to provide health care just rubs them the wrong way from the beginning. And I think that's a big part of the hurdle.
What's kind of irksome about this debate is there's this idea that some of our legislators are trying to push that they're being fiscally responsible and they're being conservative and they're being brave, saying no to the federal government. There's nothing fiscally responsible or conservative about throwing money away. Right? This is kind of the definition of fiscally irresponsible. It's having a big pot of money that we could use to help out low-income people and not do it. I admire people that are willing to take a personal risk to stand up for a principle they believe in. But here they're standing up for a principle and making the poor without health insurance pay the cost. It's not a very ethical or courageous viewpoint.
I consider myself a conservative. I'm a Republican. I understand the misgivings of people worried about the federal debt and of too much government. And having said that, though, I don't think the Medicaid being the whipping boy is the right problem.
And if the program, whatever program comes about, if it turns out to be not successful, we could certainly get out of it. It's one of those kind of political scare tactics, I think, saying, well, entitlements never go away. You can stop this program the day you started. It's really that simple. There's not any federal strings. There's not any mandates. We're tossing away about $50 million a month as a state by inaction. Are we going to use that money now to do something useful with it?
I think I'm more outgoing and I feel better about myself. I feel like I'm accomplishing something. My hope is to help myself, but not only myself, but somebody else. You know, some people would just give up and run. Hopefully the new drug.
Hopefully this new drug, they've had a lot of success with it.
At the time of my surgery, they actually diagnosed me with stage 4 cancer. That really scared me. Doesn't scare me near as much as that anymore. Thursday after I had my treatment, we turned around and went to the store. Afterwards, I was just fine with that. I'm taking that many pills now a day. Wow. I'm trying to think. 13, 14. The last while, I've had problem with my back, my shoulders. I don't know for sure why. I was on PCN for about 3 years. And I was going to say, they give me some drugs to help me some, but I couldn't have tests like the big one is colonoscopy. Couldn't have CAT scans, MRI, anything like that. Plus, couldn't go to a specialist. This is one thing that I really needed. Otherwise, they would have caught it maybe in the beginning.
PCN is a program that we already have in the state of Utah, which gives coverage right now, some degree of coverage to people in that gap.
Everybody says, well, PCN should be out there for you. Well, I qualify, but it's not there.
It covers some very important things, but then it leaves out a bunch of very important things.
It's not insurance, right? It's a little bit of access to health care, but it's not insurance by any stretch of the imagination.
It doesn't cover it if you have to go in the hospital. It doesn't cover it if you need any surgery.
Stinks!
It doesn't cover it if you need a CT scan or an ultrasound.
In other words, there was no care. Say if you had to go to a specialist.
It doesn't cover any specialist that you may need to see. So it's not even close to what we would typically call insurance.
They covered a lot of preventative type of things, but when I turned 50, you know, they suggested you get a colonoscopy, and that's not covered at all. So that's something that's going to have to wait. It's been harmful for my daughters too, and I have really wanted to be able to provide at least that for them. And all their friends are covered under their parents' insurance. That hurts as a parent to not be able to provide for your kids' needs.
As mothers in here, as American mothers, we need the best for our children. And if we are not healthy, the children is not going to be healthy.
As a parent, once your kids come to you and say, hey, I'm in a situation, I need help, there's nothing you wouldn't do for them.
I have loving parents that have cared for me. They're just as worried for me as the next parent, you know, and same goes for everybody else that's incarcerated, you know, not everybody, but majority.
Law enforcement is often the first line of triage and sometimes even the first line of treatment for people in healthcare situations. Typically mental health care, but also physical health care.
I mean, everybody knows most of the folks in our jail have either a substance abuse problem or a mental health problem or both, and that is a fairly large part of what got them in there.
So I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I've been sober since November 1st of 2008. I struggled with addictions my whole life, since I was a teenager. I was 19 years old when I got sent to prison.
Often our only resource is to lock that person up, put them in jail, which is not either a place where treatment's available or where treatment's available in a not very efficient fashion. So they'll go to court, they'll resolve their criminality and be back out on the street really with nothing ever treated, nothing ever resolved, nothing even perhaps diagnosed.
So I got out a few times. I think originally when I first got out, I think I was still under my parents' insurance. So I imagine I probably went to the doctor. I wasn't out too long. I was out about a year before I violated and went back.
I call it a squirrel wheel cycle where they'll go into jail, they'll appear before a judge for some minor violation, get some jail time perhaps, be back out on the street and back in mental health crisis, and we see them all over again. That's clearly not a very efficient way to deal with society's, the people in society who've got mental health issues.
It was almost easier to be in prison, and I joke around about it with my friends, like, because while I was in prison, I could get that I could pay that $4 and go see the doctor. Most of my medical needs were addressed while I was locked up.
It's much cheaper and much more efficient to provide those kind of services in some kind of a managed care setting.
Because I'm a convicted felon, it's been difficult for me to get a good job where I get paid decent money. Prior to the last year, I was working at a job and I was only making $7 minimum wage to start, and then I got bumped up to about $8.25. And so with those wages and then being a full-time student, it was just really difficult for me to be able to pay for any kind of medical needs. Or when I first heard about Obamacare, I thought that everybody fit into that gap. I thought everybody would qualify for insurance. And so when I did apply and I was denied, I was surprised. It definitely was discouraging. It's hard when you're out there trying to do right, and hurdles pop up in front of you like that.
Almost everyone exiting jail or prison has lost any health care coverage that they had. Typically, they're not going to be people who are available for Medicaid under our current scheme, and so they're going to be walking out of the institution maybe with a few days of prescribed medication, but for the most part, no aftercare, no resources to get aftercare, and so if they've been treated and stabilized in the incarceration setting, it won't be very long before they'll be unstable and needing additional treatment or additional resources to keep them at that level of stability. If you think that it's costly and inefficient in a hospital emergency room, think about how costly and inefficient it is in the correctional setting, where if we have to transport them, for example, to the hospital, we're paying transport costs. We're paying for the cost of an officer to stay there and monitor a person 24/7. It's an incredibly expensive phenomenon. Really, the mental health community should be dealing with these folks and helping them achieve some quality of life. We're not going to do it as cops. We'll help your neighborhood quality of life by removing those folks and locking them up. To what end? Really? Is that the best our society can do? I don't think so.
We all fall into the same gap. We're all human, and that's regardless of our past poor choices that we've made.
It's just part of having shots. Any kind.
You okay?
Yeah. Real smart guy.
He doesn't try to sugarcoat things, he tells you what's going on, which is okay. I'd sooner know what's going on than not going on. See the main doctor to try to figure out how we're going to try to start controlling her pain and stuff like that, so it's been every day this week.
It's a lot easier getting out than in. Yeah. The swollen feet, it's no fun. Yeah.
Well, they canceled the treatment the last time because we're going to try to do this new drug with Sylvia.
Uh-huh.
So they dropped the regular chemo, but they want to keep up on your blood work, see what's going on with that. So they said basically spend more time family and doing things together because
you never know.
And your breathing feels okay? Okay. Go ahead and lay back. You know, to me, listening. Kick your legs up there.
Yeah, but my legs up. Out.
Sorry about that. And,
well, we got to come back tomorrow too. They took her port out this morning.
You mean unplugged it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we could set it up for tomorrow too, or they could easily just plug it. Carol, right now you're being considered for a clinical trial.
Right. It's supposed to start next week.
Yeah, so that's cetuximab that you were on. Wasn't effective, unfortunately, and so the disease has progressed. I mean, we can tell that and how you're feeling, I think, or it gives us a clue, but then also on the imaging done, it shows that it's gotten worse. And so The next step, if you wanted to pursue therapy, and I know you have, is to try this clinical trial. So if someone is being considered for therapy, then we can't do hospice.
Ow! I'm not out of time. Go!
The treatment had not worked at all from the previous stuff we were on.
He took work off a lot, and it kind of bugged me, but at that time I didn't realize how bad he was. And now I feel bad. He played it off pretty well.
The day he passed away about 1 o'clock in the morning on September 11th, if that's not a bad enough day. And Jamie's birthday was the 10th. So they had spent time together that day and planned on doing a number of things, and he just didn't feel well enough to do them. And was it later in the evening, you were going to go visit your parents, and he just said, I'm just so tired, can you go without me? And she came home not long after midnight and found him unresponsive. And
after I found him and we got him to the hospital, I was pretty calm. Like, I didn't expect him to pass away, and then it happened. And the first couple weeks after he died, it's kind of like you're almost numb, so you don't get to feel everything. And so as time goes on, I don't know if it's better to feel this sadness or if I miss being numb, and I really just have to take it day by day. And some days are harder. Sometimes it's hard to be around his family just because they all remind me of him so much.
Yeah. You know, sometimes better than others. But you know, you know people who have lost children, and you try to imagine how hard it would be, but you could never prepare for it. And people would come up to me afterwards and even today and say, I'm so sorry and I can't imagine what you're going through. And I tell them that's the perfect thing to say because they can't imagine. But we miss him terribly every day. And I don't know if that will end. Not long after he passed away, I talked to my brother-in-law's parents who had lost a son at 16 in a violent way. He was the victim of a random act of violence. And I asked John how long it took before he really got over it. And he said, it's been 17 years. And some days I wake up wondering if I can make it through another day. So it's tough. It's tough.
When we met with the pain doctor, which I told you he was going to do the next day, and he come in and examined her and just shuddered and shook his head and says, we got to get you on hospice immediately and morphine and all that stuff. Probably maybe hospice care at home or a rehab center. And I spent the last 7 hours just basically holding her, which was the way she wanted it. She just wanted to be right here at the house. So, it was a really beautiful experience, spiritual and things of that nature. She went very quietly. Girl's legacy is to see the people right now that will possibly start getting help will get help rather than being treated like she put it as a second-class citizen.
After a year of debates, protests, and deal-making, Congress has passed a health care reform bill.
The court is leaving open to the states to come back and opt into the Medicaid expansion at their discretion.
Is it a moral issue? Do we help people that have health care needs? Absolutely.
88% of the population of this state are saying this is what we need.
Utahns are still waiting to find out what kind of health insurance will be available to them in the new year.
We've just kicked the can down another month, a few months, and even as much as a year.
Utah lawmakers decided not to decide what to do about Medicaid expansion.
I'm just trying to stay optimistic and hope that I'm doing everything that I can possibly do.
And if we are not healthy, the children is not going to be healthy.
House Speaker Greg Hughes said his chamber would not consider Healthy Utah, as it's called, because there was no support for it.
Healthy Utah is not over, but the clock is ticking.
If you're one without insurance, would you rather have it for 2 years or not at all?
You did no one any benefits by giving it even temporarily if it meant taking it away.
In general, if they didn't have to be worrying so much about, oh, I can't afford this, I can't go to the hospital, I can't do this, and that was just something that was, no, you can do that, they could focus more on everything else that's part of their life.
There are those that feel like that we don't owe each other the responsibility of helping each other, but we do.
My voice needs to be heard. This could be a family member of yours.
Medical insurance, for me, that's hope for a future. It's hope for work. It's hope for a social life.
I don't see it as a forever thing. I see myself in that cap and gown and further on down the road working full-time with benefits, yay, benefits.
I just don't want to see somebody else in that same situation.
If we go to a legislative special session and we have political gamesmanship, our answer then is you put different people in the chair.
But why throw the money away that's kind of coming in or could come in until we get to that point?
If the legislature were to put in place a plan that would cover people like me that fall in this gap, that would mean everything.
It's paid, it's done. We just have to decide, are we going to take the money back? Are we going to take our tax refund that the government is already taking of the taxes that we pay every year?
Say something, let's use our democracy to the best we can.
That's our goal, is to get people to get help.
When they need it.